presentation, because I know that's what everybody's waiting for.
Great. Well, thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Ginger.
So welcome to Success Strategies for Creating a Power BI Implementation. One of the things that I have been doing a lot of is helping various people out with implementing Power BI, and I do a number of presentations, and I get asked a lot of questions on, how we make this work. And so that's really what this presentation is more about, more than what you traditionally see with Power BI, which is how these reports work, which I will not be talking about. All right, so implementing Power BI. So what can you do with it? Well, Power BI is like Legos. It's a bunch of tools in a box. And you need to figure out which ones to pull out when to build what you're trying to build. And one of the things that I think is really important when putting together a Power BI implementation is you got to have a plan. You have to plan what you're going to do prior to just going in and creating the reports, because if you don't, you may end up doing quite a bit of rework, and who wants to do that? So one of the we're going to talk about here are the steps that I believe will help you be very successful in your implementation of Power BI. The first thing you need to worry about is, or plan, is data modeling and your data refresh strategies. The next thing, a very close second, is security and administration. After you have that figured out, now it's time to do some development and figure out how you're going to distribute it. So hopefully now that I've caught your attention, so I'll lead into a little bit about me. My name is Ginger Grant. I'm a senior consultant here at Pragmatic Works. I am on Twitter way too much at Desert Isle SQL, and that's a really good way to get a hold of me. If you have any questions about Power BI, I'd be happy to answer it. I've also got a lot of information on my blog about Power BI. I've been working in the data space for a number of years. I have been working recently in a lot more data science sort of issues, and I was recently awarded a Microsoft MVP in data platform. All right, boring stuff out of the way. Let's get back to talking about Power BI. So if you're looking at doing a Power BI project, the first thing that you probably want to look at is your data model. Are you going to model it, any data? Because one of the options you have with Power BI, going back to little blocks of Legos, is you don't have to model a thing. You can model absolutely nothing and use your existing data structures. So you want to identify what your sources are. One of the very common things that's done with Power BI is bringing in data from a lot of places. And by a lot of places, I mean putting together an Excel spreadsheet that has some data that everybody uses and doesn't live in a database in there anywhere. That's one of the things you can do with Power BI. So what you want to do is figure out what you need to make your reports. And who's responsible for the content? If you are bringing in some source data from somebody else, who's going to be updating it? Where's it going to live? Make sure that it doesn't get moved on you so that the data is always going to be available. And you want to test to make sure that the access that you have is what you want to distribute. If you are going to create a data model, this is a little in the weeds trick here, but you want to create a date table first. So what am I talking about? Well, if you are doing a Power BI implementation, you're probably going to want to do something with dates. You want to know what's happening over time. If you choose to do this, the first thing you should add to your model is a date table. Now, why is this? Well, Power BI uses identifies a date table by the fact that it has a key that is contained of dates. In Excel Power Pivot, there is a ability to mark a table as date. That's not available in Power BI. It has to recognize it as date. There is a trick to using mark as date table. If your data happens to use some kind of a date key instead, you definitely want to do this first. If you are interested in what the steps are for bringing in a date table that does not have, has a date key rather than an actual date, I've got a post on that on my blog at Desert Isle SQL to step you through it, but if you are going to do it, you need to do that first and then add all the rest of your tables. So think about that first, as in, because most models will have a date table within it. All right, the next step that you need to worry about when putting together a Power BI implementation is, of course, data refresh. Way too often when I'm helping people out implementing Power BI, this is done last, and this ends up being a big problem. You can, of course, always click on that little refresh button within Power BI and refresh your data, but that's not an automated solution. Another thing you can do is use Power Update, which is a great little product that is available for you to use to update Power BI as well. And of course, the third thing, which is what most people do, is use the Power BI service to update their data. Well, when using the Power BI service, this is when all of your information about your source really hits the road. You need to identify that you can access it. You need to know what all the source, and you need to make sure that you have one model that supports it. A lot of times, everybody who wants to do a report is interested in using this data from the same sources. Well, it makes sense to refresh that data once, not refresh that data 10 times. If you look at creating a model which refreshes first, that means that everybody will use one model that gets refreshed once rather than 5 models which all need to be refreshed 5 times that all have the same data in it. So think about this first when you are doing a report design. Matter of fact, I would look at doing this prior to even creating a report. It's that important and can change everything and keep you from doing rework. So a little bit about gateways. If you had been using Power BI prior to July 6th, and you haven't updated your gateway, sorry, you need to probably update your gateway. The reason why is that, of course, Microsoft changed it. Microsoft went from having an enterprise version of the gateway as well as a personal version to the gateway to one gateway, which has both of those components in it. The reason that they did this is to ensure that they could install a gateway on the same physical location as other gateways, which previously was not the case, and also to kind of clean up some underlying ability to use one gateway for other products. So the on-premise gateway is the way for updating the data. When do you need it? Well, if you have any kind of on-premises or Azure VM data, you need a gateway. I know you may think, like I did, that if you've got an Azure VM, what do I need? What do I need a on-premises gateway for? It's in the cloud. Well, the short answer is because Microsoft said so. There's no way for it to know exactly where your data is, so that if you have an Azure VM, you will need to have an on-premise gateway. You do not need a gateway if you are using cloud resources. So if you are doing cloud resources, you don't have to listen for the next couple slides, because that's what we're going to be talking about. And there are 2 ways that you can use a gateway. You can use integrated security, or you can go completely around security. And for everyone who's involved in IT, this will probably really catch your eye, because believe it or not, all the security that you are implementing to make sure that the vast majority of your users don't have access to the data can be circumvented by one user who has access to the data. So let's go into depth about the which gateway to use. As I said, there is one gateway, but there's 2 options within it. One of them is the enterprise gateway, and the other one is the personal gateway. With the enterprise gateway, you have the ability to inherit your database security model. So if you have a SQL Server database and you already have security on it, you can, with the enterprise version, inherit that security model. You do have to involve the database administrator to do this. You can't just, because of the rights involved necessary to make this happen. You can, with an enterprise gateway, create a connection so that your data can be accessed in near real time, and that is called direct query. If you are using the personal gateway, you are using the access permissions of the person who created it. This can be a problem. Let's say that, and I have seen this, let's say that you work in finance, and because you work in finance, you have the ability to look at everybody's salary data. And that information is unique to the people in your group. However, if you create a personal gateway with your access, then all that information is available to everybody who uses it, because the gateway is using your security. This can get to be a really big deal for DBAs and IT administrators who don't understand this. Just because that there is security does not mean that it's being used. If you're using a personal gateway, all the security that is being used is the one created from the person who's using it. This can be implemented without involving anyone from IT. If the person who wishes to create a personal gateway loads it on their laptop and refreshes the data when their laptop is on, IT may not be involved at all. This can cause some serious security issues. And this is by design, so that is something that you want to be aware of when you are looking at gateways, understanding what you want to do. There is no way with a personal gateway that you can do any kind of inheriting of the security model. It's just going to use the permissions of the person who is using it. This brings us to security administration. There's a number of different ways that Power BI can and does use security. It uses Active Directory inheritance and independence. Active Directory security is part of Power BI, whether or not you have Office 365 or not. It's the abilities that you are provided are a little bit more limited if you do not have Office 365, but you do have Active Directory security in Azure regardless. It also uses Active Directory security when you inherit with Office 365, which means that there are various places within your Active Directory registry where the email address needs to match the user email address in Power BI, and if this is not the case, you may have security issues when using an enterprise gateway. This is kind of a pretty deep topic. I do have a blog post on it if you want to look at why you might have problems implementing an enterprise data refresh and you're having problems with Active Directory. It may have to do with how your Active Directory has been set up. Now, in terms of data security, there's a couple of different ways to implement data security. You can create a Power BI model that has row-level security within it. This is in preview mode right now, and unfortunately, if you change the model, you lose your row-level security. So for this reason, a lot of people haven't implemented row-level security, but it is available to you. And the other thing that's not very well known is security and administration in Power BI is in great part done by the Office 365 administrator. Quite often this person is very separate from the people who have data access, but this is the person who determines whether or not content packs can be created of all things. So your Office 365 administrator is in great part administering Power BI. Let's talk a little bit more about Active Directory security. So you have source integrated security models with Active Directory. Your security hives are inherited by Power BI. It's included without Office 365 or with it. Like I said before, it may require modification of your Active Directory hive. One thing that I also do recommend that you create when using Power BI, and I realize this is going to cost you an additional $10 a month because it has to be a pro account, but I highly recommend that you create a system ID for Power BI in Active Directory. The reason for this is that Power BI is very much a user-based security model. You sign up individual users. Well, this can be a problem if somebody goes on vacation or quits, because then reports can be that are owned by a person are then gone. Even in instances where you use a work group, if you deploy from an ID and that person quits, then the reports are not available. So I really highly recommend that you create a system ID to resolve problems that you might have in deployment and for Power BI. Now, one thing about security for Power BI, data security is completely separate from it. You can incorporate it with Active Directory with using your database security, but it's not required. You can build row-level security, but again, that's not required. And like I said, one of the major flaws with row-level security right now is its inability to withstand updating the model, which is a kind of a big problem. One thing that people do to keep data to create data security is actually create different models. Well, why would I want to do that? Well, for example, let's say that you've got two sales regions, one in the east and one in the west, and you do not wish one of them to the people in the east to look at the people in the west data. What can you do? Well, one thing that you can do is create two separate Power BI reports and restrict whether one for east and one for west. And if you do that and release it, then you can release the appropriate model so that people have the ability to look at only the data that they want. This is very often employed where you don't have any data security. If you have SQL Server 2016, you have the ability to implement row-level security, but if you were just going up against a straight SQL Server, there's really no way for you to do this other than to create a separate model and restrict the data in that way. Power BI administrative settings. I know a lot of people probably haven't really looked at this because they may not be admins, so I wanted to make sure that I showed how you get into this because it's a very important feature with Power BI and something that I don't think a lot of people know a lot about. One of the things that if you know that you have the administrative options, is underneath the gear you see the admin portal. And it's within the admin portal that you see just how tightly the security model is incorporated with Office 365 because there's a giant yellow button that says go to Office 365 Admin Center for a number of options, which we're going to look at here when we demo it. One of the things that you do in Office 365 is manage the users, do audit logs. Within Power BI, you can do usage metrics and tenant settings. But your ability to see this at all does generally mean that you have been granted Office 365 administrator privileges to be able to see the options from within Power BI, which is kind of confusing, but that's how it works. All right, so what can you look at? We'll be looking at this in a little more detail earlier, but these are the settings that are available to you within administrative settings. One of them is whether that you can publish content packs to the entire organization. The interesting thing about all these options is I don't have the ability to pick users. So either everybody gets to publish to the web or nobody gets to publish to the web. A little story about the publish to the web security option. When Microsoft first created embedded reporting, they did not have, for 1 week, the ability to not do that. And there are a number of organizations where they do not wish all of their data to be distributed to the web. For one reason, there is costs involved when that occurs. And the other thing is that they don't want their proprietary data to be spread on the web. So if you do not wish to let people do this, make sure that this is turned off. The ability to export data, that is an option. It is not something that is necessarily turned on, although most installations do have that turned on. Interacting with R, again, that's an option. You can turn that off. Cortana, you can turn that on and off. Using Analyze in Excel is also something you can turn off. Again, all this information is something that is not user specific. It is account specific. So you have to decide for the organization which ones you want to turn on and which ones you want to turn off. The newest one here that we will be talking about is for creating audit logs for internal activity and compliance purposes. This is brand new. I'll show you how that works. And oh, by the way, you have to have Office 365 to make that work. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these administration functions. So I'm going to go ahead and look at Power BI here. And I'm going to go ahead and, obviously I just got a dashboard up here for one of the ones that I've been using. So let's go ahead and go to the administration portal. Now, if you are an Office 365 administrator, you have the ability to see who's doing what with Power BI, which, if you ask me, is one of the more interesting metrics. you can see how many users have how many dashboards. And you can see at Pragmatic Works, Brad Gall has the most. And the number of, and all the people who've got users and dashboards here, the most consumed dashboards by users, the number of dashboards, number of user reports, and number of user data sets, and then the most consumed packages by users. Now, one thing that is kind of annoying is that the ability to download this is not available. So hopefully you like this format, because you cannot say, create a report out of any of this information here. The interactiveness of this is not turned on, so clicking doesn't necessarily show me anything. Oh, yes, I got it to turn on. Yes, but it doesn't turn off. It doesn't act like most of the other Power BI reports that you might see. And so you can also see the most packages assumed by groups. Now, groups is something that is also known as workspaces. Groups are in Power BI are the same as groups within the Office 365 Administrator, which is commonly implemented as things like email groups. So email groups, your organization can show up as groups in Power BI and vice versa. So if we look at some of the other available options here, if we go to Manage Users, that's Office 365. So you are going straight into Office 365 if you have the ability to do that. And let's look at audit logs, because this is a new feature that I don't think very many people are familiar with, and I wanted to make sure that I let everybody take a look at it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Office 365 Administration Center, and I'm going to show you audit logs. And when I first looked at this, I was really, really surprised, because I'm like, well, this is a Power BI thing. So why, when I do it, do I see everything? This is not just a Power BI feature. If you'll notice, a file and folder activities, this is for SharePoint Online, site administration activities, mailbox activities, Sway, user admin, group admin. All these are options that show up when I went to turn on auditing for Power BI. So you get a lot more information than you would think of. So I'm going to go ahead and select Power BI here, because this is what I do want to see. One of the things when you turn on auditing is you need to wait 24 hours before it to provide data. And this is starting at the 6th, but that's kind of not accurate because I didn't turn it on then. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Search. And this will show all the events that are available with Power BI, and we'll take a look at them once it loads. This screen is not available until you see data. If you were to go into this, it would give you the ability to turn on the audit log. So we can see here it's sorted in date order, because that's what's selected, what was done to our Power BI tenants. The one thing that we can also do is take a look at some of these things that are added, because some of them are more informational than others, because, great, Devin Knight looked at a Power BI report. Well, that's not terribly useful. Now, yes, I could uncheck that here, but if I have this information here, I can also just filter the results. So if I just type deleted, and then search, I can see within this date range how many things are deleted. We'll let it load here. And I can see that Rachel, Jason, and TJ all have deleted various things and what they deleted. And I can see when they did it. So if you wanted to know, hey, what happened to that report? I knew it was just there. This will tell you what happened to it. This is a preview feature. It came out in August, so it's probably not something that you're terribly familiar with. And I can also take this off, and I can just select the options that I wanted to here. So I could get to the same thing by basically saying, well, I don't care about who viewed anything. I just want to know, anything, if anything got deleted, and I could select the or printed and select the various options here and change search, and then my number of things I have will change. Let's go ahead and loading it now. So this is the audit feature, and you can also, of course, export these results if you wanted to send them to Excel. So pretty cool and really widespread because it's got a lot more functionality than just being a Power BI function. All right. So now we talked about security and data access. Let's now talk about development strategies, because now we know what we want to do and how we want to secure it. Now it's time to start working on it. Power BI's got a lot of tools to help people with that, one of them being group workspaces. I can't stress how important it is to use group workspaces enough. Group workspaces is provides tools so that reports are owned by the company, not by a person. Next thing is OneDrive. OneDrive gives you the capability of poor man source control. We'll take a look at that. Content packs. Content packs are a really cool way to make sure that everybody's working on the same page. Templates are a little bit newer. The content packs are an exact match for your environment and can get you up and running on your environment in seconds. Templates are really close, but you probably will have to do some modification for things in your environment to get them to work. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Now, one of the interesting things in Power BI gets into report ownership. You log in with your email address and you create things in My Workspace. Well, when you do this, and let's say somebody leaves, then when your email address gets deleted, so do all your reports. That's probably not optimal. Reports, generally speaking, what are they? Are they somebody's personal project or are they a corporate asset? Well, if the answer is that they're a corporate asset, then they shouldn't be. All right, content packs are a really cool way for making sure that everybody is using the model that is connected to the refresh data. If you create a content pack that, yes?
A couple people are asking if you can go back to the report ownership slide, because I think
sure.
That.
That's where we ended up, definitely. Yeah. I was going to say everything worked fine on my machine. All right, this is where we wrapped off?
Yes.
Okay, so reports, who owns them? Is it owned by the company or is it somebody's pet project? Generally speaking, it should be owned by the company, which means that it shouldn't just live under your email address. You need to figure out where you're going to put the reports. You're going to need to figure out what you're going to do for versioning. Are you going to allow publishing for web? I mean, since it's a company-wide option, you need to tell people whether or not you are or not going to allow them to do it. Adding or deleting reports, how is that going to handle? What's the process for that? And also you need a succession plan or disaster recovery plan. And this is really why you need to create that system ID, use that for deploying, because if you have a system ID, then it's no longer tied to an individual. So this system ID should be a part of every Power BI implementation. The next thing I want to talk about is group workspaces. I can't stress enough how important it is that you create and use group workspaces. Do not use My Workspace for creating a report. This also allows you the ability to work with other people, so make sure that you create a group workspace. By the way, when you do this, you will also create a group email. This is an option that administrators really don't like, but that's how it works. And you also will get a group OneDrive created, which can be a very helpful place to store the reports. So you don't want to hear, well, I can't work on that report because so-and-so has it. Not if you put it in the group OneDrive location, and that group OneDrive location is limited access to the people within the workspace. Within this group OneDrive, you have the ability to do checkouts and versioning as well. All right, next thing I want to talk about is content packs. Content packs are a really cool way to make sure that everyone is using data that is actually being refreshed. There's, generally speaking, when more people are creating workspaces, that somebody will create, is better at creating models that connect than others. If you create a content pack, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a sample. You can include sample reports you want people to modify, or just something generic, just to make sure that everyone is using the content pack that is going to be refreshed. Highly recommend using that. If you take a look at the ones that are available in your organization, you can see the ones that can be created and used. Generally speaking, you want to tell people what they're good for and why they would want to use them, and icons can be helpful as well. And they exist only on the Power BI service. So you don't necessarily hand one to somebody else to create. They live on the service. So that is where you would be creating reports with that. Now templates were created a little bit later. They are similar to content packs but not the same. With a template, you have the ability to get close to your data but not exactly. For something customized for your data. Microsoft originally created some templates for accessing Salesforce data. So it's a generic way of accessing, for example, Salesforce or CRM data. You would, of course, need to customize it to make sure that it works with your Salesforce or CRM installation. A number of companies have also created their own templates as well. I know SQL Century has one for specifically looking at their data. So templates are out there. A lot of companies have created them so that people can access data that they generate. It's designed primarily for IT, not for business analysts, because the sources are cloud and you do have to set up your data connections. And it does connect to a lot of common SSAS sources. There's so many of them out there, you might want to go ahead and take a look at them when you get a chance. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of a demo to show you these workspaces, because many people probably haven't seen them at all. So going back into Power BI. Oops. And you'll see here that I'm in my workspace right now. And in my workspace, I've got the reports you see here and the dashboards you see here. I'm also a member of a number of group workspaces. Now, some of these were created as email groups. For example, this is an email group, but it shows up as Power BI group. This, of course, is a Power BI group, so we'll go ahead and look at this one. And if you do this, you'll notice that the number of reports and dashboards have changed. I don't have the same ones that I had in the past. So if I want to look at everything about this group, I can go here and look at members. And if I do this, you'll notice that I go straight into Outlook, because this is working as an Outlook group. And I can see who all is a member of my Power BI group and see everybody's there. And I also have the ability to add people as well. The other thing that I can do is I want to go ahead and I want to look at the OneDrive that was created for this group. And this is my personal OneDrive here, and wait here for the groups to be loading, and I will see the Power BI group. And within the Power BI group, I've got a number of various Power BI files and also an Excel file. You'll see that they're not just me. Chris has also done it well. If I click on this button here, you'll see that I have the ability to look at version history. And we can see that this was originally created by me, and Chris went ahead and added a new report page to it, so that you have the ability to look at versioning from within your group. Only the 7 members who are available in this group can add or access these files as well. You also have the ability to, if I go to more, check in and check out files. You'll notice that this particular file has a little arrow here. This file has been checked out. And this is so that somebody else visually knows that I'm working on it, so that they shouldn't work on it as well. So you have a little bit of source control here as well as your version history. You can also revert versions if you want to do this. Now, one thing about Power BI files, unfortunately, you cannot edit them within here. If you go to open, what it'll do is it will download it, and you will be editing it locally, and then you would need to save to this location. I generally upload it because, to be honest, I'm not real happy with the way that the Power BI integration, or excuse me, the OneDrive integration works with File Explorer. So I upload files to this group so that they can be used by all the group members at any time. This is a really neat tool that allows you to have the files that the group is working on stored in a location that everybody can have access to, and it's secured. You have versioning and you have checkout. So I highly recommend, if you haven't looked at OneDrive with your work groups that you take a look at it. I know a lot of people aren't even aware that this feature exists, and it's a really great way to share files within groups within Power BI. All right. Next thing that I want to talk about was report distribution. It's very important that you use the system ID for report distribution. The system ID should be a member of your group workspace. And the reason why is that if you distribute a report from within your work group, which is of course what you should be doing, and you distribute that to a given user, and let's say it's me and I am consulting at your company and I leave and you delete my account, the reports aren't accessible. To ensure that you will not have problems with is create and use a system ID for report distribution, and you won't have that problem. One thing that you also might want to think of is mobile design. Microsoft recently released an enhancement to Power BI showing the ability to create a report for mobile so that you can see what it looks on your phone. This, of course, is going to be different if you are designing reports for a phone versus a screen. Obviously, you're talking about much different landscape in terms of space. So keep that in mind when you're distributing reports. If you have a lot of people using them on phone or tablets, you might want to change the way that the report is designed to make it more accessible to the phones. Report distribution is Azure Active Directory based. One thing that we talked about before is you might need to create a separate report for separate data if you have people that you can't separate the data any other way. All right, so in our presentation today, we talked about the things that I think are really important to ensure that you have a successful Power BI implementation. Determine what your data is and refresh it. Do that first. I can't tell you how many hours would have been saved if people had just done that first instead of last. You want to design and implement security. Don't make that happen. Thanking yourself that you don't have to redo it later. You want to create collaborative environments with Workspace and OneDrive. Let's face it, somebody was going to leave or go on vacation, and that one person shouldn't hold the entire company hostage because they're the only ones who have access to their Power BI reports. Use Workspaces. Use the OneDrive as a place to store all of your PBIX files so that people who are working on them have access to them. If you don't do this, it can get to be messy later. Trust me, I've seen it. You don't want to go there. And the other thing too is to make sure that your distributions go off without a hitch. Make sure you create and use a system ID for your distributions so that they're not tied to an individual, and that way that everything will always be available. So with a little planning, you can stack all the little Lego blocks of Power BI tools together and have a really great implementation and allow everyone to access and use their data. So with that, I was just wondering if there are any questions. I do have a number of blog posts on my website on Desert Isle SQL if you want to take a look at some of the specific things that I talked about, like date table, workspaces, and some ways to configure Active Directory so that you won't have security problems, as well as gateways. So Liz, do we have any questions?
Yeah, I actually made you organizer so you're able to kind of pull them up and pick and choose as you
Cool.
like. If you have any problem with that, let me know and I'll be happy to read them out though.
Let's see. I'll read the first one out because I can't show answered questions because I'm not seeing them.
Okay, and I can do that.
Okay. Now I do. I can see them. Okay.
You got it?
Yes. What is the R class that I will be teaching? The R class that I will be teaching is it's SQL Saturday in Minnesota. I don't know much more about ClickView other than that they released the R capability with it. Multi-select. One of the things too that I wanted to bring up too is most of the features that I talked about are not available on the free version. This is only for Pro version. To be clear, if a user uses a personal gateway, they can undermine any security in place for the data? Yes, they can. because they will be using the security of the person who has created the personal gateway, and that may have nothing to do with all the other security that you are interested in. How could you control deployments using the system account so reports aren't lost when somebody leaves? The answer to that is what you do is you deploy with the system account, log in with the system account, and deploy with that. Yes, you do have to be an Office 365 admin to view the portal. Groups is also known as Workspaces. Is there auditing on data set usage? No, there is not. That's not one of the options that are available within the Power BI administrative features. It's mainly focused on accessing the report, not drilling down that far into it. Could you talk about appending external data into Power BI? One thing that you can do with Power BI within your data model is you can create, you can access multiple sources. You don't have to just use one source. So if you want to take files from one database, you would get data and add those particular tables that you're interested into your model. And then select information from another database and add those to your model. It's up to you then to figure out how to join them. Many times this may mean that you will need to create a key of some kind to join tables together from disparate systems, but that's something that you can do with by perhaps creating a key. I will say that while you can create columns within Power BI, from a performance standpoint, you're better off creating those in SQL that you use to add the SQL on the back end versus doing it within Power BI for performance reasons. Another thing, if you are accessing tables in Power BI, again, it's kind of a best practice to not access a table directly. If you can, access a view of the table. That way, if the table changes, the view will not, and so it won't break anything from within Power BI. Does a content pack include both data model and a sample report? Yes, it does. It always contains a sample report connecting to a particular data model. Group workspaces, can you invite an existing email distribution list, or do you have to individually invite all users? Yes, you can invite an existing email distribution list. And if you are a part of an email distribution list, that can also be a Power BI group workspace. What are the limitations of refreshing Power BI data source when not using direct query? I would like to refresh the model with the latest data every 15 minutes. Is this possible? No guarantees there, John. You can refresh the data very frequently. However, Microsoft will not guarantee that the data will be there every 15 minutes. So you can do it. It's going to be kind of haphazard whether it will be that frequently. You will also get a lot of performance degradation when you are refreshing the data model under which people are doing it, so you might see some problems generating reports that way. If you want to use Power BI without Office 365, what are the differences? If you do not have Office 365, many of the features that I showed you are not available. For example, auditing, not available. The Azure Active Directory is always included with or without Office 365. You also do not have you do have the ability to create group workspaces without Office 365, but when you do so, you will not have a OneDrive available. So you can do it, but there are some features that are not going to be available to you. What about Power BI embedded for deploying content to external users? Yes, this is something that you definitely can do. It's really kind of an involved topic. One probably would be better to have a session on it alone. One thing, when you do embed a Power BI report, know that this is not covered under the $10 a month for your license. There is a per usage charge. I do not remember exactly what they are because they were changed recently, but know that when a report is being used in an embedded, that you will be billed for it. So it can keep that in mind when you decide whether or not you're going to want to do it. Can you transfer a report from one person to another person? Not really. Let me see. Some other options here. How do you add an Excel source to Enterprise Gateway? You can't. Enterprise Gateway does not allow connection to Excel. Excel is going to be handled under Personal Gateway because there is no embedded security within Excel itself. How do you schedule reports every day? That option is available under Manage so that you can schedule the reports. I have some information about that on my blog site. Can you create a sales report but limit access to the data for a sales rep to their data without creating a separate report? Yes, if you have implemented row-level security. This can be done with a analysis services, either tabular or multidimensional, where you have that security created and you use a enterprise gateway. The enterprise gateway will then allow to inherit security. Also, SQL Server 2016 allows row-level security, or if you create a Power BI report that with row-level security, you can do that as well. Keep in mind that if you do it in Power BI, that when you modify the data structure, that your row-level security will go away. Does Power BI work very well with tabular and row-level security? Yes, it works great. And if you are doing tabular, it's a really great model and works very well. What is the recommended strategy for a real near-time dashboard? If you are interested in a real near-time dashboard, you are going to need to use a direct query implementation or a cloud implementation for your data source. If you do that, you will have the ability to access the data very quickly. I'm not able to answer the rest of these questions because I see that we're coming up at the top of the hour, but I do plan on blogging about this in a future update, so I'll have the answers available on my website at Desert Isle SQL.
No problem. Yeah, we'll make sure to get Ginger all these questions so she can answer those, and we'll probably post it on our blog site as well. As always, this session was recorded, so if you missed it or you want to share it or watch it again, you'll receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. Ginger, I know a couple of people have asked about your slide deck. Are you going to make that available?
Yeah, I'll have a link to it on my site.
Okay, perfect. Again, if you guys think of any questions, feel free to email me, Liz. It's the email that comes with all your GoToWebinar information, and I'll be happy to pass it along to Ginger. And as always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Ginger.